General Hospital will reveal the atmosphere at the bonfire beach party seemed to be immersed in dazzling lights, pulsating music, and the carefree laughter of the teenagers of Port Charles. Gentle waves lapped softly at the shore, blending with the thumping heartbeat of youth immersed in fleeting moments of joy. But beneath that vibrant, lively canvas lay a dark truth. Quietly swelling like a silent tidal wave, strong enough to wash away not just the joys of adolescence, but also the dignity, friendships, and trust between those who once seemed closest. This wasn't just a simple teen party, it was a night of destiny, a meticulously orchestrated trap set by someone no one suspected, Emma. From that seemingly safe and carefree setting, chaos began to spiral, and long-buried secrets began to surface, unleashing a chain of consequences no one could undo. Danny Morgan, while looking for Rocco among the boisterous crowd, happened to find the boy unconscious on the cold sand, just a few steps away from the water's edge. Rocco's face was pale, his chest barely rising and falling. And he was completely unresponsive to Danny's desperate attempts to wake him. A half-spilled plastic cup lay nearby, with a strange chemical odor lingering in the air, sending a chill down Danny's spine. He suddenly found himself in an impossible dilemma. If he called for help, the entire scandal of underage drinking and suspected drug use at the teen party would explode, and not only would Danny be dragged into the mess, but so would many of their classmates, risking suspension or worse. But if he kept quiet, leaving Rocco in that vulnerable state, the boy might never wake up. He could die without anyone knowing what happened. Danny's heart pounded as he dragged Rocco's limp body away from the water, trying to pull him to a safer area. He pressed his ear against Rocco's chest, straining to hear a heartbeat, as beads of sweat rolled down his forehead despite the sea breeze. Danny knew in that moment that he was no longer dealing with a typical teenage mishap. This was something bigger, far more sinister, than anything anyone had prepared for. Because what had happened to Rocco wasn't an accident. It was the result of a deliberate and cruel plan crafted by someone hiding behind the mask of innocence. Not far from the scene, Emma stood concealed behind a thicket, her eyes locked on the unfolding disaster. Her fingers clutched her phone so tightly that her nails dug into her palms, drawing blood she didn't even notice. For a fleeting moment, worry flashed across her face, but it quickly dissolved into a cold, calculating gaze. She wasn't surprised that Rocco had collapsed. She had been the one who had spiked his drink with a potent sedative she had stolen from her university's research lab, where she worked as a research assistant. It wasn't meant to kill. Just to knock him out for a few hours, long enough to set the stage for her real goal, framing Josslyn. Emma had long been the model student, the teacher's favorite, polite, brilliant, dependable. But when Josslyn, with her rebellious charm and magnetic presence, began to attract attention, even catching the eye of Professor Hank Dalton and taking the research assistant position Emma coveted, resentment took root. When Emma discovered that Josslyn had ties to Vaughn, a shady older student with connections to illegal activities, she saw an opportunity to destroy Josslyn's reputation. And she took it. First, Emma staged the disappearance of her USB drive containing her critical research paper, creating the illusion that Josslyn had stolen it to sabotage her academic progress. But the real masterstroke came with the drug drink she handed to Rocco under the guise of a friendly offering. Emma knew Josslyn had previously been seen near the drinks table. She knew about the lingering tension between Josslyn and Rocco. And she knew that Josslyn's edgy, independent image made her a convenient scapegoat. It was all perfectly designed. What Emma didn't anticipate was how far things would spiral out of control. Rocco didn't wake up after a few hours, he slipped into a deep coma. At the hospital, doctors found a dangerously high concentration of a sedative in his bloodstream, enough to stop his heart if help hadn't arrived in time. Word of the incident spread like wildfire, shaking the entire town. The school came under investigation, parents flooded the hospital in panic, and Josslyn's name quickly rose to the top of the suspect list. Emma, Maintaining her innocent facade, wasted no time feeding a fabricated story to the authorities and school faculty. She claimed she saw Josslyn give the drink to Rocco and even pretended to cry while describing how Josslyn had once threatened to teach him a lesson. Her delivery was so convincing. Her performance so tearfully believable, that no one questioned her version of events. Josslyn was suspended, ostracized by her peers, and her mother was called in to sign disciplinary forms. Emma, watching the chaos unfold, believed she had won. But she had underestimated one person, Lulu. As Rocco's mother and a former investigative journalist, Lulu wasn't easily manipulated. When she saw the faint injection mark on Rocco's arm and the unnatural stillness of her son, her instincts screamed that this wasn't a teenage prank gone wrong. It was something calculated. Something evil. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Lulu began her own investigation. She retraced every step from that night, obtained hospital records, and even hired a private investigator to examine the chemical composition of the drug found in Rocco's blood. The pieces began to fall into place. Surveillance footage, witness accounts, lab access records, it all pointed to one person, Emma. Armed with irrefutable evidence, Lulu didn't go to the police, she went straight to the school's emergency parent-teacher meeting. Before the stunned audience of faculty, parents, and students, she laid everything bare. She exposed Emma's lies, her stolen sedatives, her staged panic over the USB drive, and her carefully orchestrated setup of Josslyn. The shock was absolute. Emma stood frozen in the center of the room, pale and speechless, as every pair of eyes turned toward her, not with admiration, but with horror. From that moment, Emma's carefully crafted world began to crumble. Her reputation was destroyed. The academic path she had once guarded so jealously vanished. Josslyn, although vindicated, remained deeply wounded by the betrayal and humiliation. Danny carried the weight of guilt for not speaking up sooner. And Lulu, no longer just a grieving mother, had become a force of reckoning, determined to protect her son at any cost. The bonfire that summer was no ordinary beach party. It was a turning point, a night when the mask of innocence was torn away, when the hidden darkness of one girl's ambition left lasting scars on everyone involved. It was a lesson that sometimes the most dangerous people are not the loudest or the wildest, but the ones who smile the sweetest and hide the sharpest blades behind their backs. Meanwhile, Emma put on a display of panic so convincing that few questioned her sincerity. She raced frantically from one end of the event to the other, her eyes wide with distress. Her voice cracking as she asked everyone if they had seen her missing USB drive. It was no ordinary piece of plastic, it contained her extra credit thesis, a dense, meticulously written research paper meant to secure her coveted position as a research assistant under Professor Hank Dalton, a role that could catapult her academic future far ahead of her peers. To Emma, that USB was the physical embodiment of years of carefully curated perfection, long nights at the library, countless revisions, and the pressure of maintaining her spotless academic record. Losing it, even temporarily, would have been catastrophic, or so she led everyone to believe. But beneath the performance, there was a much more deliberate calculation in play. What made the situation suspicious wasn't just Emma's overwrought behavior, but rather the peculiar proximity of Josslyn to the very area where the USB had supposedly gone missing. Just minutes after Emma began her search, the USB was mysteriously discovered, lying conspicuously behind a row of coolers, in a place Emma claimed she had never gone near. The find was all too convenient, too clean. No one found it before, and suddenly, there it was, within eyesight of Josslyn, who had supposedly just happened to see it. Whispers began to ripple among the partygoers. Some thought it was just a coincidence. Others weren't so sure. Emma didn't need to point fingers outright, the seed had already been planted. Her reaction to the discovery was carefully measured, relieved but shaken, thankful but wary. She kept her tone gracious, but her eyes told a different story. They hardened, narrowed ever so slightly. As they met Josslyn's gaze, Emma was no longer just the panicked student trying to reclaim her future, she was a chess master seeing her opponents move and preparing her next with cold precision. She knew what people would think. She knew how easy it would be to steer the narrative without ever saying the words aloud. In the tight-knit, rumor-hungry world of Port Charles High, reputation was everything, and perception often mattered more than truth. What no one knew, not even those closest to her, was that Emma's innocent persona was a carefully crafted illusion. She was not the passive victim of academic sabotage, she was the architect of a far more sinister scheme. Earlier that evening, Emma had quietly slipped away from the main gathering with a small vial tucked into her coat pocket. It contained a colorless, nearly odorless sedative she had borrowed from the university lab, where her trusted position granted her access to sensitive materials. She knew the dosage. She knew the timing. She knew how to conceal her tracks. She didn't intend to kill Rocco, only to knock him out, just long enough to trigger panic, confusion, and chaos. Her goal was simple: frame Josslyn. Josslyn had become Emma's unspoken rival, a thorn in her side in every way that mattered. Where Emma was reserved, Josslyn was bold. Where Emma followed rules, Josslyn challenged them. And worst of all, where Emma toiled for validation, Josslyn seemed to earn it effortlessly. The research assistant opportunity had been Emma's for the taking, until Professor Dalton, impressed by Josslyn's unique perspective during a class debate, began to reconsider his shortlist. That one moment, that one shift in admiration, lit a fire in Emma's chest that quickly burned into resentment. The party at Bonfire Beach presented the perfect opportunity. With enough manipulation, Emma could destroy Josslyn's credibility entirely. And she didn't waste time. After drugging Rocco's drink and ensuring he would be found in a compromised state, Emma returned to the crowd, just in time to realize her USB was missing. She knew what she was doing. The distraction would redirect suspicion away from her and toward Josslyn, especially when the USB reappeared so conveniently near Josslyn's path. Then came the whispers. Maybe Josslyn had stolen it to sabotage Emma, maybe, out of spite, she had slipped something into Rocco's drink. Emma didn't need to accuse anyone directly. The storm of implication she'd stirred was enough. She played her role masterfully. Through hushed conversations and carefully constructed concern, she began subtly reinforcing the idea that Josslyn had both motive and opportunity. Texts circulated, glances exchanged, and within hours, the narrative had begun to tilt. Josslyn, already known for her rebellious streak, became the prime suspect, not just for the USB theft, but for the drink that had rendered Rocco unconscious. Parents caught wind of the incident. The school board was notified. Teachers began to murmur. Emma watched it all unfold, her features perfectly composed, her mask unshaken. But what made Emma's deception truly dangerous was the precision with which she executed it. Every detail was intentional: the timing of her panic, the placement of the USB, the tone she used when speaking to adults versus peers. She had studied how people reacted to crisis, how suspicion worked, how fear could cloud judgment. Emma weaponized innocence like a scalpel, clean, sharp, and devastating. She knew that when the situation escalated, few parents would question the model student. They would, however, eagerly believe that the wild, unpredictable Josslyn, whose past included a few altercations and an independent streak that defied adult authority, was to blame. Emma's plan was cruel. But it was brilliant. She didn't just want to punish Josslyn, she wanted to erase her. To reduce her to a cautionary tale. A whispered scandal that would linger in hallways long after the dust settled. By the time authorities intervened, Emma assumed the damage would be done. Josslyn would be suspended, humiliated, maybe even expelled. And Emma, perfect, polite, blameless Emma, would walk away untouched, her path to Dalton's research lab wide open once more. What Emma underestimated, however, was how deep the consequences of her scheme would run, and how much her own unraveling would mirror the destruction she so carefully plotted for someone else. But in that moment, with the crowd watching, the rumors spreading, and Rocco still unconscious in a hospital bed, Emma believed she had already won. Her hands were clean. Her plan had worked. And no one, not even Josslyn herself, could prove otherwise. Or so she thought. But Emma had misjudged one person, Lulu. As Rocco's mother, and a woman shaped by experience, heartache, and survival, Lulu was not someone easily deceived by outward appearances or carefully constructed lies. The moment she stepped into the hospital room and saw her son lying motionless, his breath shallow, his skin pale and clammy, Lulu felt an instinctive, chilling certainty that the real danger hadn't come from Josslyn, but from someone far more calculated, Emma. The very girl she had trusted, defended, and even admired. She didn't wait for the police or the school board to take action. Lulu took matters into her own hands. Propelled by the primal fury of a mother whose child had been harmed, she began retracing every step of that fateful night. She questioned the teenagers who had been present at the bonfire party, examined the timeline of events, and pushed for access to security footage from nearby establishments. At first, there was resistance, or reluctance to believe that the soft-spoken, academically gifted Emma could be involved in something so dark. But piece by piece, the truth began to surface. Small inconsistencies in Emma's story, digital records of her lab access, and even discrepancies in the timing of her supposed USB panic began to crack open the carefully composed facade. Then came the physical evidence. A strand of Emma's hair found in the cup used by Rocco. Partial fingerprints on a lab-grade sedative vial that matched those on Emma's university ID. Surveillance footage showing Emma leaving the chemistry lab late at night, just hours before the party, with a small, unmarked container in her bag. Each discovery was like a nail driven into the coffin of her deception. Lulu's anger, once contained within grief and suspicion, now burned with the force of justice denied. She wasn't simply outraged as a mother, she was livid as a woman who had once been lied to, betrayed, and now forced to witness her child's life gambled away as part of someone else's lust for glory. She made her move publicly. At an emergency parent-teacher assembly hastily organized in response to the scandal, Emma was still riding the wave of misplaced sympathy. Painted as the poor girl whose academic dreams had been sabotaged, while Josslyn sat shunned and isolated, bearing the weight of a community's silent accusations. But Lulu entered the room with iron in her spine and truth on her tongue. With calm precision and unwavering authority, she laid out the evidence, beginning with the toxicology report, continuing through the lab access records, and culminating with the forensic analysis of Emma's fingerprints on the vial of sedatives used to poison Rocco. The reversal was cataclysmic. The room, once thick with tension and pity for Emma, fell into stunned silence. Emma stood frozen in place at the center of the auditorium. Her face drained of color as every carefully constructed lie unraveled before a sea of teachers, parents, and classmates. Josslyn, once cast as the villain, was suddenly seen for what she truly was. A victim of a targeted, malicious setup. The gazes that once turned away from her now shifted toward Emma, no longer filled with admiration, but with disgust and disbelief. Lulu didn't stop there. She demanded that both the school and the hospital proceed with a formal criminal investigation into the attempted poisoning of her son. What Emma had done wasn't a prank. Wasn't a misunderstanding, it was premeditated harm with the intent to destroy another student's life and protect her own ambition. No amount of privilege, intelligence, or previous goodwill could shield her now. The truth, once unearthed, was no longer under Emma's control. It belonged to everyone in that room, and the consequences had just begun. And so, one summer night at Bonfire didn't just disrupt a party. It shattered illusions across all of Port Charles. It exposed the rot hiding behind polished smiles, and served as a sobering warning. Sometimes, the most dangerous people aren't the loudest or the wildest, they are the ones who know how to weaponize their innocence. In the world of manipulation, no one truly wins. All that remains are broken relationships, deep wounds, and futures forever altered. Though Josslyn was exonerated, the scars remained. The sting of betrayal, the judgmental stares. The public shaming, these things don't fade overnight. She would carry them, silently, long after the whispers stopped. And Lulu, no longer the vulnerable mother who once placed trust in appearances, emerged with a renewed ferocity. She would never again hesitate to stand between her son and the people who meant him harm. As for Emma, once hailed as a symbol of brilliance and promise, she became nothing more than a disgraceful memory. Swept away by the very ambition and cruelty she had once believed she could conceal forever.